Joining us now, we do have a guest, a special treat. State Senator David Sanders is here. Senator Sanders is from District 15. And Senator Sanders, I'm so glad that you could come on the program today.
Oh, it's great to be on the program. Grew up listening to this radio station and living over in Walnut Ridge. Growing up as a bobcat in the I call them the days of Clinton, but it was the early days of the Republican majority.
Yeah.
Back, just starting, and I would spend my summers listening to Rush Limbaugh on my Walkman. So it's I don't know where that Walkman is, but anyway.
Yeah. And could anybody
certainly appreciate?
Yeah, and could anybody in high school actually identify what a Walkman is either? That would be an interesting question. So
yeah, it looks like some sort of foreign object. Headphones is sort of a giveaway.
Yeah.
But, those cassettes really throw them. But no, it's great. It's great to be on. I was telling you, we were in the queue. I'm looking forward to coming. I'll actually be up a week from Friday. In a moment of weakness, the school board of the Lawrence County School District has decided to extend an invitation to me to be the commencement speaker on a week from Friday at Walnut Ridge High School. So going back home, I graduated there in 1993. So this will be the first time I've ever been able to go back in any capacity to speak to students. These are graduates and a lot of families there, but northeastern Arkansas is a very special place, and spent a lot of time up there. And of course, we have a little bit of a Northeast Arkansas connection in the state Senate. Senator Rapert, Senator Disnang, and myself, our fathers all graduated from Maynard, Arkansas. All graduated from high school within a span of about 2 years of each other, and our families have been friends for years. And now we're all down in the state Senate. We don't live in northeastern Arkansas anymore, but certainly hold that important part of our state in our hearts. We're down there working.
Yeah, growing up here, so it's certainly a very special place to live. There's no doubt about that. I'm glad you could come on. I know there's been a lot of talk, not just in the last week, but in the last 2 years, really, about the Arkansas private option. And so I do have a few questions for you. Some of it starts with current news and it kind of goes on, but I'd really like to get through these questions today if we can. First,
how long do we have?
We have until, we can really take this until 20 after, if not a little bit beyond that. So we've got a good segment of time.
Good deal.
Our first question: do you agree that the private option is currently 10 to 15% over the projected cost of the program?
No, and let me tell you why. So that's been a big talking point of those who have been against it. If you look at the raw numbers and look at what you're talking about is the portion of the private option with regard to budget neutrality, and I think this is very important. A lot of folks want to equate the private option with Obamacare and say that it is Obamacare. I appreciate the fact that you call it the private option. This wasn't something that Kathleen Sebelius came up with, or Governor Beebe, for that matter, or our Medicaid director, Andy Allison. It was something that a handful of Republican legislators came up with, and quite frankly, modeled after things that some of my heroes have done. A dear friend of mine, in the great state of Texas, Rick Perry, actually proposed the private option in Texas in 2008, April 16th of 2008. Asked then Secretary Leavitt if he could do a premium assistance model where they would take all those things that the federal government was funding in terms of uncompensated care, in terms of dish payments, both Medicare and Medicaid dish payments, and instead of spending that money, let's spend it and purchase insurance for individuals.
Yeah, I know what the private option is. I would just why are we hearing then if you're saying that that's not the case? If you're saying it's not the case that it's 10 to 15% over the projected cost, why are we then reading reports that it's 10 to 15% over projected cost?
I think what we read is what we're looking at is the per member per month average cost, and there are a couple of reasons why they are higher than originally estimated, and that's what is going on. And the important thing is, I think some of the folks have said, in the month of May, we actually had come down a little bit. So in the month of April, we were a little higher, and now it's going to come down. That's basically projected, and that average comes from the average age of the folks who are on it, and what we're paying out in premiums. I would say my good friend Joe Farrar, who's probably one of the lead critics on this thing, this time last year was saying that the average annual premium was going to be over $7,200 a year, and he said take it to the bank. Well, we know that wasn't the case.
Yeah,
it is a little bit over. The important thing to remember, Paul, is that budget neutrality is not formed on a month reading, and the reason this isn't what I was going with Governor Perry is, he sought permission to do the private option in Texas through an 1115 waiver, an authority that's been in place since 1965, and they could never get around it because it was so big. The sheer size of what they were going to do in Texas was so big they didn't get the approval.
Yeah,
but we do have a budget cap, and we do have cost considerations, and that is one of the differences between the private option and the Obamacare expansion, Medicaid expansion, is the open-ended
well, I want to ask you about
that. That goes on. We actually have to have budget neutrality. So here are a couple of things. One, we're going to see that the numbers will continue to come down. The other thing is just, the amount of money that is used to purchase private insurance for these individuals and what's paid out. That money, there's a protection called the MLR. It says 80% of the funds paid in have to go to medical care. We are not hearing at all. In fact, we're hearing counter. There's not gross overutilization. So
right.
There are a few things that we're going to be able to do this year. I think that number is going to come down, and then heading into 2015, the rates will be announced over the summer.
Okay,
and
I do want to talk to you.
That's what's important. What's important.
I do want to talk to you about budget neutrality, but before I do, I got another question for you. So, do you believe that the federal cost caps that were placed on the state as part of the waiver agreement with the federal government are binding?
In terms of,
are they binding? Do we have to follow what the caps are? The federal government says.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the earlier criticisms was made is that somehow we're going to repay all this money right now. And the fact of the matter is, hang on a second. I don't think anybody has argued that you're going to have to pay it back right now. The idea you've not attended the committee meetings that I've been in.
Well,
so,
I haven't read that. I haven't read that, but what I have read,
I can tell you that
after the three. Okay, well, I take you at your word, obviously. But what I have read is that people are saying eventually we're going to have to pay this money back. So is it binding?
That would be true. It would be true if in fact, basically what happened was they took the April numbers and extrapolated over the 3-year period.
Right.
And so.
Which that's all the information we have. That's all the information we have at the time.
No, but it's not though, because if you look at the budget neutrality formula, it gives consideration to the fact that the average age was it on target or is it off target? So the average age is a little bit under 39 right now. In the original budget neutrality agreement, it said 37 was the average age. So what we can do is we can shift that. But my point is, I don't want to shift it because here's the deal: we have consideration. We have budget consideration. It's one of the reasons why in the previous legislative session we passed legislation that will allow us to come up for our own plan for non-emergency transportation. It's the WRAP benefit that we're responsible for on the private option. I think we're going to be able to get that down significantly. The other thing that will come online in plan year 2015 is, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that this week, is the HSA, health savings accounts that will be extended to the private option.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the addition of cost sharing from people at 50 to 100% of federal poverty. So all of those things are things that put downward cost pressure. If you just look at if you look at the Indiana experience, this is what Mitch Daniels went with in 2007, and they've kept it ever since. And if you look at the injection of consumerism in healthcare, it doesn't matter if these people are at the low end of the poverty scale or if it's somebody who's on a company HSA plan. What you see is decreased utilization to the tune of 18 to 22%. And it's decreased utilization that doesn't put people at risk. It's like I'm more mindful of the cost that I'm accruing, and I'm more mindful of my healthcare spend because I have some stake in the game. If I don't spend, I get to keep a bit of that money.
Yeah.
And so
Can I ask you something?
Look at you look at the HSA that we're modeling. It's very, very close to what Mitch Daniels has done. former Governor Daniels did in Indiana, and what's been continued
okay.
with Governor Pence.
Can I ask you a question, though, about the HSAs? First of all, who pays for the funds that go into the HSA? And second thing is, have you gotten approval for doing this HSA thing?
So what we've been working on, well, one, it's required, so it's required.
So you've gotten an approval?
And two, so we've been working with.
Have you gotten an approval though?
Hello.
Yeah, are you there? Have you gotten an approval?
Okay. Yeah, we are working on the plan, and there are a couple small policy considerations that the legislature will have to make before we get the final approval. So that has been in process for a long time. Okay. And so what you'll do is, if you look at the premium that's paid on the private option, so you have the premium, and then there's sort of some of the cost sharing is taken care of. So what you would do is you would take the differential of that, and you would put some of that into the HSA, but then we'll also require people who are on the private option to contribute. Mm-hmm. And it's very similar to what Indiana's done. Yeah. And in fact, that's what we modeled it after when we wrote it into the legislation.
Okay, so, back to the caps.
I think it's going to be a big benefit, and I think it's going to be one of those things that bring down the cost.
Right.
So there's a concern over the caps. Well, look, it's a legitimate concern, and we want to be mindful of the PMPM, remember, for month spending.
Yeah.
But again, we look at it through a annual window. We look at a 2-year window. We look at a 3-year window. It's very important to do that.
But one more question on the caps. So, and because I have basically 2 questions. I guess the question is, can we adjust the caps without federal approval? And
I think there are certainly limitations to that.
Okay, good. I'm glad that's out in the open.
I think there are limitations to that, to the amount of adjusting that cap. But again, I'm not concerned about adjusting the caps. What I'm more concerned about is keeping spending in line. And again, that's what I like about the private option. It's one of the sales points that we said when we were trying to develop, is that we want budget neutrality, because you look at states that have expanded Medicaid, they don't have that consideration. It is sort of an open-ended deal, and it will go up. And look, a lot of the critics, and I think
I'm a critic.
Your opposition to it, I think, is legitimate. I do, and I think some others is legitimate. But the fact is, there are a lot of folks who their opposition to it is tied to their job, tied to who's paying their bills. It's tied to the fundraising of the particular organization that they work for, and I get that too. But it is what it is. But the good news is, we've got people on the conservative side, really from legitimate policy organizations who are looking at what we're doing. We talk to them constantly. We're in communicato with them, and they say, you know what, this is a policy innovation. It's not Medicaid managed care. It's certainly not Medicaid. And
it is used with Obamacare or Medicaid dollars, right? I mean,
it's just exactly what Rick Perry was trying to do in Texas. He was going to use federal dollars.
But I'm not.
Federal dollars to buy insurance. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there.
You act like I say if Rick Perry does it, I'm going to be okay with it. I'm a policy guy.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Well, I am too. And the fact of the matter is, when you look at the enormous amount of money that Obamacare takes out of Arkansas in terms of the cuts, in terms of the Medicare cuts, the Medicaid dish payments, I think some of the critics have said they've not been able to draw the distinction between Medicare dish and Medicaid dish. You're looking at well over $1 billion that's leaving Arkansas. And again, we're talking about, in terms of the uninsured population, I mean, it's essentially the same model. That others have argued for. Let's cut all the federal spending in uncompensated care, and let's trim back other areas, and then let's pay for it this way, where you allow people to get on insurance. And I think it's not what I would have come up with on our own, absent the passage of the Affordable Care Act.
Let me ask you this:
this is clearly a response to all the negative, a lot of the negative consequences of the Affordable Care Act.
Let me ask you this: at what point? And I know that maybe too soon, but so I kind of give you an out there. But at what point do we say, or do you say, the private option is too expensive?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think that's why I think the budget caps are important. I think that's why budget neutrality is important. I think moving into year two, when you look at rates, I think that's important. It's why we have the things in there that we have, because in its current form, absent health savings account, absent a specialized plan for for non-emergency transportation, and even future reforms in terms of requiring more of beneficiaries. I think I think it wouldn't work. I don't think it would work. I think it would grow. We have to have sort of the injection of consumerism in all areas of healthcare, and the private option's not any different.
So do you think that right now, so far, the private option has been a success?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of I was looking at the data this morning. We've got some sampling from hospitals in terms of uncompensated care, or actually people who show up with or without insurance. And you look at the census and ER. The critics. You can only go to your critics. And I'll say this. One of them, and I'll invoke Mr. Farrar again. He told me, he said, you may have, AM Better, or you may have Qual Choice in year one, but in year two, you're only going to have one player, and it's going to be Blue Cross Blue Shield. Well, that's not the case. In fact, we have in every single region, 7 regions of the state, AM Better, Qual Choice, Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield, and National Blue Cross Blue Shield will be offered. And that wasn't the case in year one. There were some limitations to the engagement of Ambetter and the engagement of Qual Choice. They are going to compete across all areas, so that brings about competition. If you look at the average age of our pool compared to any other state, we are the youngest. D.C. is not a state; they're a district. They have a younger pool. It's primarily because they've got all those congressional staffers in their insurance pool. So these things have consequences, and the good news is it's not a theoretical policy argument. And, as these things unwind, and we see it be played out, we'll have a better answer. The good news is, I'm glad, and I told Joe, if we come back and the average premium is around $7,200, we can't even let this thing get off the ground.
Okay.
Well, it was well under that.
So you consider it a success. And my next question is, do you
consider it a failure?
Well, the cost per I actually do consider it a failure just on principle. I mean, it's the largest expansion of government in Arkansas history. We had a chance.
Well, I think that's actually not true. There have been larger expansions in terms of spend. But I would point you back to the mid-90s.
You created a whole new class of entitlement. I mean, that's what you did. And
let
me just tell you this. I mean, because if we're going to, I'll get away from my questions. That's fine. I really think that this whole thing demonstrates that there's a key majority, a key minority in the, quote, conservative, limited government, or maybe just Republican movement that cannot recognize the pitfalls of big government and certainly can't recognize the benefits of limited government.
Yeah, well, Paul, I will tell you, while we were both up in northeastern Arkansas, I guess you would have been around 8 years old. I was 18 years old. I've been at this fight a long time. I can tell you what I don't want my healthcare system to become, and that is what I would watch every week, and I still watch it every week. When I turn on the C-SPAN at 11 o'clock on Sunday night, when you listen to Prime Minister's questions, I know what I don't want to become, and that is a single-payer system where the government is calling all of the shots, where there is no private insurance, there are no private entities.
No, instead what you have is you have private corporations colluding with government. And I don't know what. To me, both of those are unacceptable because that's what we have. We're using taxpayer monies and giving it to insurance companies. I mean, that's to me. I don't see the difference between the two in terms of outcome, in terms of reality.
I will tell you this, Paul. If you will watch TV tonight, you'll see that our friend Tom Cotton has taken a heck of a beating for suggesting that we might want to look at a similar innovation with Medicare, and that is to use premium assistance in Medicare. And Mark Pryor's beating him over the head with it. I don't think anybody would dispute others' others conservative credentials. Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin, when you look at what his state did, his state actually extended Medicaid coverage all the way up to 200% of federal poverty. What his state did was actually dialed back their Medicaid program from 100% to 200% of federal poverty, shift all of those folks to the exchange, and then they removed the cap on enrollment in their fee-for-service Medicaid managed care model, where they actually added people to the fee-for-service Medicaid program up there. So here's the deal. Like I said, I would not have divined this, wouldn't have created it, wouldn't even thought about it had the Affordable Care Act not been passed.
So are you saying that we're going to be able? Are you claiming that we're transitioning people from traditional Medicaid to the private option? Is that what you just said? I'm sorry, I might have missed that.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the meetings I had last week was looking at the ARC-ID's first population, portions of the ARC-ID's first population, to move them off of the fee-for-service Medicaid program and putting them onto the private option.
But that hasn't happened yet, right? You haven't gotten approval for that yet?
Well, there is a transition plan.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
I'm just making sure we know. Hang on. I'm just making sure we know that everybody who's in the private option now is a brand new class. It's a brand new entitlement.
That's actually not true.
Okay.
There were people who probably roughly close to 35,000 people who were actually in another form of program that have been taken off of that are now in this. So that's not true.
Okay.
So there are people who were in Medicaid, had Medicaid coverage, who are now covered under the private option. But my question is, so I guess you do acknowledge that transitioning people off of the fee-for-service program is a good thing. I guess you do acknowledge that moving them into an HSA is a good thing.
It's taxpayer money. I'm taking your word for it. I didn't think that had happened yet. I thought you had to get approval to move people from the traditional, who were already covered in traditional Medicaid, to the private option.
Some of those have done that. Some of those populations have already done that. What we're looking at, and what the law calls for, is beginning a transition plan, particularly for the ARC-ID's first program. And if that's a pretty significant expansion of government, and it was done in 1997. And if you look at the growth in that program, it has been exorbitant, particularly in therapeutic areas and other areas. But so I mean, I guess like I said, this is sort of the good thing, is that some of this stuff will be borne out over time. Some things that you care about and I care about, and when they happen, I think we'll all say, okay, you know what, these guys did do what they said they were going to do.
I have one last question. One last question.
Sure.
And then we can go. So the main reason you came on is because at the end of the week last week, Senator Brian King was in the news. They had their press conference on the private options shortcomings, if you will. And so anyway, you recently told the Democrat Gazette, quote, all they're concerned about right now is holding up signs and making grossly overstated claims and criticisms in the middle of a primary election cycle. And you might have already covered some of that, but what about their claims are grossly overstated?
Well, I think first of all and foremost that the private option has been an unmitigated disaster, which I think is incorrect. And there's a fundamental. And Brian's a good friend of mine. We agree on most things and support each other on most things. But you can disagree, but what you can't do is you can't have your own set of facts. And I think that's what's happened a lot of times is you take, for instance, with the budget caps in the month and extrapolating forward and say, well, this is all the money that we're going to be. No, it's not true at all, because again, you have a 3-year waiver period. You have budget neutrality that's calculated over 3 years for that very reason, so that you can be cost conscious and so that you can do things to keep costs in line with where they were intended to be. And I think that's very, very important. And again, remember when Goolsbee scored this idea way back, it never got any traction, and there were Republicans that were pushing for this and talking about it. What they were saying is, well, the average annual premium for this type of arrangement would be like $9,000 a year. Well, that's preposterous. I mean, everyone knew that was not the case, and so I think the critics on both the left and the right of the private option I think there have been things that they have stated and said almost as fact that have been borne out as not being correct.
Yeah.
And that's the passage of time will give us that as we roll out with the HSA, as we roll out with the transition plan, as we roll out with our non-emergency transportation state-specific plan, all those things that are all aimed at what? Controlling cost. I think that will be borne out, and so we won't have sort of theoretical arguments of what is and what isn't to argue about, because it'll all be in front of us. And
right.
Listen, I'll say this, Paul. If you want, and this is a legitimate question, if you want to say, are you spending more money and extending coverage to people? Look, I'll agree with you. That's my. I mean, that's.
And we didn't have to. We didn't have to put 250,000 more people. We didn't have to put.
Well, we don't have 250,000. I think it's 100.
Well, that's eventual projection. 250,000.
Again, I think what's important is what's true and what's fact, and not what's not.
You're right. But, technically, the way I said it, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'll take that criticism. Let me just say I do thank you for coming on the program. We've been talking with.
So when do I get to come back? That's what I know.
When do you want to do it?
Let me say this real quick, Paul. And this is again, I'm not violating the confidence with Brian. I told Brian, Senator King, this has been a few weeks ago, and I said, Brian, this is why I said what I said. So, Brian, let's have a legitimate debate, a policy debate on this, and let's go argue the fine points.
I would love for that to happen.
And he said, okay, let's do it, but let's do it before the primaries. I was like, no, I'm very busy before the primaries. Let's do it after the primaries. He's like, I don't want to do it then. I was like, well, why? Because I just don't want to do it. So I was like, okay. So maybe we can come on your program and we can do it. Maybe somebody else. But,
maybe he can. He's actually going to be on here in the next segment. So.
Oh, well, you tell him, you give him my best. And
I will. And I do have to say this, because I will say this. I appreciate you coming on. You've been a good sport about it. I do have to say this to get this off my chest, but I could not disagree with you more on this issue.